Hey, I'm Ryan Curran, and this is my critical assignment for my lesson plan for team sport, which is lacrosse. And today I'm going to be going over the lesson itself and the sport that we're going to be playing. And specifically, this lesson is going to be covering the skills of cradling and lacrosse. Cradling in lacrosse is a lot like dribbling in other sports. It's a way to maintain the ball in your possession when you're dribbling, running down the court, running down the field, or when you have defenders on you. Cradling is going to be an important part of the sport. So, to start out, we're going to review scooping and catching, which is what we learned last week. And in scooping, this is going to be a very quick review for scooping and catching. Scooping, you're going to do a motion here. You're going to have your hands spread out in a comfortable position on the stick. If you're using a defenseman's stick, it's going to be much longer, so your hands are going to have to be spread out a little bit differently. But what you're going to do is you're going to come down and you're going to quite literally do a scooping motion, find the ball on the ground, and then push forward and then bring it up like this. And this is what's going to lead us into the cradling movement. Now, a lot of times, if you don't know much about lacrosse, you think you might just run down the court, run down the field holding the ball in the lacrosse stick, but there's a lot more to it. Cradling is after you've scooped up the ball or after you've received a pass, which we've gone over in the last lesson that we did. After you've done either one of those and now you have possession of the ball, what's going to happen is you're going to cradle. And cradling is pretty similar to what it sounds like. You're going to have your hands, either two hands, or you can also have one hand on the stick, depending on what you're doing or how advanced of a movement you're doing. But for this sake, we're going to start out, since we're first teaching these, we're going to start out using two hands. So you have the ball in the net, and you quite literally are cradling. And it's a combination of rotating the wrist and swinging the arm like this, kind of like you're flexing your bicep. You're combining this bicep flexing motion with rotation of the wrist. So it's going to look something like this. And this is really useful because it keeps the ball in your possession as you're running fast, or as you're doing side-to-side cutting motions like this. You can keep it cradled, or if a defenseman or somebody's trying to attack you and take the ball from you, possessing the ball like this, it's a lot harder for them to use it, to take the ball. You can also switch hands, and you can cradle with the opposite hand too, if, let's say, a defender comes on your right side and you're trying to protect the ball. So that's what we'll be working on today, a scooping motion into a cradle. So you'd start the cradle right away, and then I would have the students switch hands. And if some students are picking up on it very quickly, we could work into a one-handed cradle, which is also useful in lacrosse too, because you can kind of separate yourself from the defender even more so by doing that one-handed cradle. And then moving on from there, we would do our activity, and we would do most likely two different activities, potentially working into a third one depending on how long the lesson goes. So the first one would be individual running with the ball. So we would start out with a point A and a point B, and when I would have the students, when they receive the ball from the ground, they'd pick it up and they'd start at point A and they'd run and they'd cradle down to the next point. So it looks something like this, running to this point, hitting back, running back to this point, running back, and making sure they're cradling the entire time. And I have them go a second time and rotate to the other side, cradle with the left hand. Now they can go a little bit slower too when they're first starting out learning, and then they want to work their way up. You can start to go a bit quicker. And then we would work into, for another activity, a more fun activity would be a relay race with cradling. So I'd set up in teams, probably 4 lines of 10, depending on how many students we had in the class, and it would be a relay race. So we would have a point A and a point B all the way down the field, and we'd say go. The first person runs out, cradling the ball the entire time, cradling the ball, runs around the cone in their line, brings it back, and they can either dump it into the other player's stick. So they either stick out like this, they dump it, and that person goes. Or if they are feeling advanced enough, they can toss it to the next player. The next player can catch it, and then begin the cradle, and the same thing. And it's a relay race. We would do that a couple times, and then if we still had time at the end of the day, at the end of the lesson, we would go into a Sharks and Minnows game where we'd have half the class, or maybe a smaller amount of the class, start in the center, and the rest would start with balls and their sticks, and they'd be cradling, and the defensive player would most likely, for high school level, would be trying to hit the ball out of their sticks as they're trying to get across. So it's not a traditional Sharks and Minnow game, it's a lacrosse version of Sharks and Minnows, but it's a great way to practice having the ball, possessing it, and then moving to a different side, depending if the defender's coming one way, or you can practice spin moves or anything like that. It's a really good way to put cradling into motion and actually have to avoid a defensive player. So that wraps it up for the day. That would be the main portion and the game portion of the lesson. And thank you.